This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appeared at the United Nations Security Council on Wednesday and justified arming Kyiv, imposing sanctions on Moscow and support for UN resolutions as actions to defend the founding UN Charter. Wearing his signature army green, Zelensky traveled to New York to attend a meeting of the 15-member Security Council in person for the first time since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Ukraine's allies support Kyiv's case against Russia, AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
Ukraine's international allies are making their legal arguments at the UN's top court. The case alleges Moscow twisted the 1948 Genocide Convention to manufacture a pretext for its invasion last year. An unprecedented 32 states are making brief legal arguments on Wednesday to the 16-judge panel at the International Court of Justice. The court's holding hearings into Moscow's assertions that the World Court does not have jurisdiction and should throw out the case. Ukraine insists the court does indeed have. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
U.S. President Joe Biden, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged on Wednesday to work together toward a landmark agreement to forge diplomatic relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Meeting for the first time since Netanyahu returned to power in December, both leaders signaled a desire to ease strains in their relationship, but Biden also made clear he was determined to discuss their differences. These included Biden's opposition to Netanyahu's far-right government's controversial judicial overhaul plan, as well as concern about Israel's hard line towards Palestinians. This is VOA News. Azerbaijan on Wednesday says it has stopped its military action in the breakaway Nagorno-Karabakh region after Armenian separatist forces there agreed to a ceasefire. Reuters correspondent Trevor Carroll reports.
After Armenian separatist forces there agreed to a ceasefire. Under the agreement, separatist forces will disband and disarm. There will also be talks on the future of the region and the ethnic Armenians who live there. The terms of the agreement signaled the area would return to Azerbaijan's control. Both members of the Soviet Union, Armenia and Azerbaijan have already fought 2 wars since its collapse.
Reuters correspondent Trevor Carroll. Morocco plans to spend at least $11.7 billion in a post-earthquake reconstruction plan over the next 5 years, the royal palace said on Wednesday. A 6.8 magnitude earthquake struck on September 8th, killing more than 2,900 people, mostly in the hard-to-reach villages of the High Atlas Mountains. The plan would target 4.2 million people in the worst-hit provinces, the royal palace said, following a meeting of King Mohammed VI with government and army officials. The European Union is pulling out its $5 million financial support to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission because of the way the commission ran the country's August general election. Columbus Mavanga reports from Harare.
Linda Basarira is the founder of the opposition Labour Economists and African Democrats Party.
They've always wanted to meddle with how we do elections in this country. And it should be a wake-up call to the government of this country to start funding its own elections.
But Brighton Tebuka, a lawyer and political commentator, says the EU was justified in withdrawing the money.
The election that ZEC delivered fell far short of those standards, quite brazenly so in many respects in terms of what we saw.
On Wednesday, Zimbabwe Electoral Commission refused to comment. Columbus Mavunga, VOA News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Rwanda's president says he will run for a 4th term next year and that, quote, what the House thinks tonight is the earlier lifting of term limits to extend his rule. President Paul Kagame made the announcement in an interview with a French-language publication. The 65-year-old Kagame has been president since 2000 and was declared the winner of the previous election in 2017 with more than 98% of the vote. He has been the de facto leader since Rwanda's 1994 genocide. I'm Joe Ramsey.
This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. Time to the visit by the president of Ukraine. The United States government on Thursday announced it is sending an additional $328 million worth of weapons, including missiles, rockets, and artillery rounds to Kyiv for its defensive war against Russia. Details from VOA's chief national correspondent Steve Herman in Washington.
After stopping on Thursday on Capitol Hill and at the Pentagon, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky held talks at the White House with President Joe Biden.
Russia hopes once more to use winter as a weapon against the people of Ukraine. But as I discussed with President Zelensky, the people of Ukraine are steeled for this struggle ahead. And the United States is going to continue to stand with you.
Zelensky has also been pushing for the United States to supply his military with long-range guided missiles capable of striking behind Russian front lines. Meanwhile, some Republican lawmakers say they do not want to authorize an additional $24 billion in military and humanitarian aid for Ukraine, noting a lack of significant progress against Russia by the Ukrainian army. Zelensky is quoted as telling senators earlier in the day, if we don't get the aid, we will lose the war. Steve Herman, VOA News, Washington.
The president of the European Council on Thursday addressed the United Nations General Assembly, saying the, quote, miracle for the world's challenges will not be possible without, quote, massive and necessary financing. Michel also called the G20 dysfunctional and called out Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. He added, however, that the war in Ukraine did not mean the disappearance of other conflicts, including climate change and poverty, saying that financing was needed to address these issues. The UN General Assembly is scheduled until September 26th in New York. You'll find expanded coverage of world news and events at our website, voanews.com. This is VOA News. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have met on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. Dorian Jones reports from Istanbul that the meeting is boosting hopes of a resumption of harmonious relations between the countries.
On the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met for the first time in person with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The meeting is a milestone in recent rapprochement efforts after a rocky relationship in the past when both often traded angry barbs. Analysts say the past will not be an obstacle moving forward. In a tweet, Turkish officials described the meeting as positive, with talks focusing on energy. Dorian Jones for VOA News, Istanbul.
House Republicans for a third time blocked a procedural vote on a defense spending bill, raising the risk of a government shutdown in just 10 days. The defeat marks another public embarrassment for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Reuters' Jillian Kitchener has more.
The Republican spending agenda has hit a roadblock among a small group of hardline conservatives who want lower spending levels. They're asking for $120 billion less than what McCarthy and Biden agreed to in May. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said the deal from May needs to be honored.
A deal is a deal. Extreme House Republicans can't even get an agreement among themselves to keep the government running or to fund the military. Certainly, agencies are looking at how to move forward in case there is a shutdown. But the best plan is for there to not be a shutdown.
Senate's Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said, quote, instead of decreasing the chance of a shutdown, Speaker McCarthy is actually increasing it by wasting time on extremist proposals that cannot become law in the Senate.
Fox Broadcast Network founder Rupert Murdoch is stepping down as leader of Fox and News Corp. AP entertainment correspondent Margie Sarazetta reports.
Fox says 92-year-old Rupert Murdoch will become chairman emeritus of both Fox and News Corp. Murdoch started with one newspaper in Australia that he inherited, and he created the first network to successfully challenge ABC, CBS, and NBC. Murdoch also founded Fox News Channel in 1996. His son Lachlan will become chairman, as well as continue to serve as chief executive officer. Murdoch says he will be involved every day in the contest of ideas in his new role. Lachlan Murdoch says his father will continue to provide valued counsel to both companies. I'm Archie Zaraletta.
Brazil's firefighters in the northeastern state of Bahia are battling wildfires fanned by strong winds and abnormally high temperatures for the season. While it's still technically winter in Brazil, a heat wave prompting record temperatures has swept across much of the country. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. There's been a call for New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez to leave Congress because of a corruption indictment. AP correspondent Norman Hall reports.
New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, a fellow Democrat, has demanded the immediate resignation of Senator Menendez. Murphy says the allegations in a corruption indictment are so serious that they compromise the senator's ability to serve. Menendez is charged with secretly aiding the authoritarian government of Egypt and trying to thwart the criminal prosecution of a friend in exchange for gold bars and cash. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said Menendez is stepping down as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee until the matter has been resolved, but Schumer stopped short of calling for him to resign. In an email statement, Menendez accused prosecutors of misrepresenting the normal work of a congressional office and called the allegations baseless. I'm Norman Hall.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Friday that Iran's activities for nuclear program are, quote, profoundly destabilizing element during an address during the press on the sidelines of the 78th United General Assembly in New York City.
Iran's own activities in pursuing a nuclear program are a profoundly destabilizing element and one that risks the security of countries not only in the region, but well beyond it, which is why we're determined, President Biden's determined, that Iran never acquire a nuclear weapon.
Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said on Wednesday that Iran has no issue with the UN nuclear watchdog inspection of its nuclear sites, days after Tehran barred multiple inspectors assigned to the country. Iran's move was a response to a call led by the United States, Britain, France, and Germany at the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors early this month for Tehran to cooperate immediately with the agency on issues including explaining uranium traces found at undeclared sites. For additional stories 24 hours a day, visit our website, voanews.com. This is VOA News. Canada shared evidence that Indian government agents were potentially involved in the murder of a Sikh separatist leader in British Columbia with New Delhi weeks ago, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said on Friday.
Canada has shared the credible allegations that I talked about on Monday with India. We did that many weeks ago, and we hope that they engage with us so that we can get to the bottom of this very serious matter.
Ties between the two countries have plunged to their lowest point in years after Trudeau told Parliament Monday there were credible allegations of Indian involvement in the assassination on Canadian soil. Russia says Ukraine has carried out a missile strike on the main headquarters of its Black Sea Fleet. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
Images on social media showed large plumes of smoke over the building in Sebastopol harbour in annexed Crimea. The Russian-installed governor of Sebastopol hasn't offered any details, saying only that emergency services have been dispatched to the site of the strike. He warned Sebastopol residents that another attack is possible and urged them not to come to the city centre. Ukraine has not immediately claimed responsibility for the attack. It comes a day after Russian missiles and artillery pounded cities across Ukraine, killing at least 5 people. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
One of the 9/11 terrorism suspects being held at the Guantanamo Bay prison camp has been deemed unfit to stand trial because he was tortured by the U.S. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
A military judge at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base has found accused 9/11 plotter Ramzi bin al-Shibh incompetent and says a military medical panel found al-Shibh's post-traumatic stress disorder and secondary psychosis can be linked to the torture he sustained in CIA custody. Defense attorney David Brock says al-Shibh's solitary confinement and being forced to stand sleepless for days at a time left his client fearful. He says this ruling is the first time the U.S. government has acknowledged the CIA torture program did psychological harm. He wants PTSD treatment for his client, but the White House has refused. Jackie Quinn, Washington.
An Israeli drone hit outposts in the Gaza Strip on Friday as violent protests persisted along the separation fence, while in a separate incident, troops shot dead a Palestinian fighter during a raid in the occupied West Bank. The military said the drone strikes targeted 2 military posts belonging to the Islamist group Hamas, which controls the Gaza Strip, while a tank hit another post from which shots were fired on troops confronting protesters. According to the Israeli military, protesters have launched incendiary balloons into Israeli territory, starting fires in areas near the separation fence. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA News.
I'm Dan Friedel.
This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. Russian Foreign Minister lambasts the West but barely mentions Ukraine in the UN speech. AP correspondent Karen Shamas reports.
In his speech in New York, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov described the US and the West as self-interested defenders of a fading international order. Lavrov accused them of stoking conflict and dividing humanity into hostile blocs. He added, they're doing everything they can to prevent the formation of a genuine multipolar and just world order. However, the long-running foreign minister did not mention the ongoing Russian war in Ukraine. For a second year in a row, the General Assembly is taking place with no end to the war in sight. I'm Karen Shamas.
At the UN General Assembly meeting in New York, African leaders are relaying a unanimous message that their continent of more than 1.3 billion people is done being a, quote, victim of a post-World War order and must be recognized and partnered with as a global power in itself. Analysts say it is a sign that the continent is becoming more conscious of the impediments stifling its development. There's also a boldness that comes with the African Union's new seat at the G20, but domestic divisions and policies with national instead of regional focuses present challenges. Activists from community groups, far-left parties, and unions have held marches around France against racism and police brutality. The protests put authorities on edge at a time when French police are deployed en masse for a string of high-security events. Lingering anger over the killing by police of a 17-year-old in June was an impetus for Saturday's protests. They include a swath of groups with sweeping demands for social justice, some 30,000 police, and are working Saturday to keep order for a visit by Pope Francis to Marseille and at 3 Rugby World Cup matches. This is VOA News. With the government shutdown potentially looming next week, a group of Congress members remains at the Capitol this weekend, seeking agreements on a group of spending bills. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
There are conservative holdouts refusing to pass spending bills that the House Speaker earlier negotiated with the White House. So now Indiana Republican Congresswoman Erin Houchin says they have to win approval where there's common ground, like defense and agriculture spending, to prevent a government shutdown.
This is a Republican perspective to stopgap and fund the government while we continue our work.
Her Louisiana colleague, Garrett Graves.
Trying to get this process on a path where we can truly reduce spending and address a lot of the fundamental problems that this administration is causing, particularly on the border, in areas like energy, inflation.
A government shutdown would take effect October 1st if the House and Senate are unable to reach agreement on a government funding plan. Jackie Quinn, Washington.
Tens of thousands of Israelis protested against the far-right coalition's judicial overhaul plans in Tel Aviv on Saturday. Earlier this year, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right coalition presented plans to strip the court of much of its powers, with a package of legislation triggering unprecedented weekly nationwide protests. Proponents say the judicial overhaul plans would restore balance to the branches of authority, but critics say it removes vital checks on government powers. Planet Earth is about to receive a special delivery, the largest sample yet from an asteroid. AP correspondent Norman Hall reports.
A NASA spacecraft will fly by Earth on Sunday and drop off what is expected to be at least a cupful of rubble it grabbed from the asteroid Bennu, closing out a 7-year quest. The OSIRIS-REx spacecraft launched from Cape Canaveral in 2016 and reached asteroid Bennu in 2018. The sample capsule will parachute into the Utah desert as its mothership flies to another asteroid encounter. NASA Recovery Manager Mike Moreau says the drop-off, about a third of the way to the moon, is no small feat.
That's like kicking like a 120,000-yard field goal.
Scientists hope to uncover some of the solar system's secrets on the samples vacuumed from Bennu's surface. I'm Norman Hall.
The U.S. ambassador to Canada has said that information shared from members of an intelligence sharing alliance was part of what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau used to make public allegations of the Indian government's possible involvement in the assassination of a Sikh Canadian. The U.S. envoy spoke to Canadian CTV News Network, but he did not give more details. A Canadian official told the Associated Press on Thursday that the allegation of India's involvement in the killing is based on surveillance of Indian diplomats in Canada, including intelligence provided by a major ally. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA News.